There we go. That looks like it.
Mira las patas, papá. Mira las patas.
Can you see the tiger? And I suppose, can you hear me? Excellent. Well, I confess the audio issue was a Patrick problem. The monitor.
To the other side, like if we needed to go to Greenbelt, so you go to the ends and go up and around. So all the haunted mansions are different.
At least slightly. In fact, only 2 are called Haunted Mansion, I believe.
Oh, really?
It's Phantom Manor in France.
Better? Is there audio and video for you?
Yeah. They're fun.
You want to pee on it? That looks like a kitty.
Dun, dun. Oh yeah? Focus on.
Oh, you want a picture on the rock?
Oh. You want a picture? Okay. You might be a better view.
That's a cute picture, by the way.
Yeah.
Not much.
Aww.
Oh, she's not cold. Oh, she just moved. Aw, look. John, she rolled over. She's rolling over. She's getting up. I think she just woke up. Oh, yeah? You see she's getting up? She's like, I think he's trying to get some breakfast.
Yeah, they sleep a lot.
Funny, in cartoons are much whiter, but I guess they just get dirty.
Yeah, I suppose, because he rolls them out down.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, you slowed her way down.
Slow motion way.
Yeah, so he's running the same route and probably
Here he
figured out
comes.
this is how he goes and gets a treat.
Come back.
Right.
I can always find them. Limited vision or not.
¿Y dónde está su bambú? ¿Dónde está su bambú?
Oh,
Can you do the Colonel, whatever?
that's what I was just thinking in my head.
Jungle Book. March
That's right.
We know we're going to destroy this tablecloth, but this is the only place to cut through, so
Yep.
we're just going to go.
We're doing it. Yeah, that's why we bought chicks at Walmart. So it's like, if it doesn't wash out, we toss it and then it's not work. That's like 2 paper plates going up. You get out the Christmas plates. I know it's like,
No, that was the smart thing.
She's yawning. No, it's a she. Oh, shoot. She's pooping over the edge, John. Wow, that's quite a show. Look, that's how she's so tired, she doesn't even want to get out of her bed. She just rolls over.
No, it's a boy.
No, this is a girl. She
Now
poops
look.
off the edge.
Oh, look, baby is a boy. Look.
Read it.
No, look. Oh, look. Male.
Oh, is that right?
No,
I'm sorry. Let me see. It says baby. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Thank you for teaching me that. Pen kiss.
Patty gave me a kiss when I was at your house the last time. I see you tomorrow.
see you tomorrow. Have fun with the Air and Space Museum.
Okay, want to go back to that?
Good one.
Oh, now he's making a noise. Look at that.
Yeah. Don't need any food.
Is Dad the only one coming over on tomorrow morning? And Patrick and
We're
okay.
bringing.
Oh yeah.
No, we'll bagels and cream cheese.
You want some screen time?
And I'm counting on.
Hi.
Yeah. Good one.
Yeah, you're very photogenic.
Yes. Well, we don't like lift
Yeah.
tea.
Tea
Got big eyes.
Yeah. In your,
Oh,
Take the tea.
I'll take a Keurig tea.
Okay.
Killing me.
Welcome, Mom.
Oh, he sleeps like dad. Look at his butt.
He's like this.
His name is Baby.
Touch my elbow. There's like a
If you please, Mr.
No, you have seen me sign it. You have no need of this.
Proctor, the village must have proof.
Damn the village! Is there no good penitence but it be public? God does not need my name nailed to the church. God knows how black my sins are.
Look, you
How
prophet.
may I teach my sons to walk like men in the world and I sold my friends?
You have not sold
I
your...
blacken all of them when I nail this to the church and they have hanged for silence.
I must have good and legal proof that you have confessed to witchcraft, Proctor.
You are the High Court. Your word is good enough. Tell them Proctor broke to his knees and wept like a woman. But my name I cannot sign.
Why? Do you mean to deny this confession when you are free?
I mean to deny nothing.
Then explain to me why you will not...
Because it is my name! Because I cannot have another in my life! Because I lie and sign myself to lies! Because I am not worth the dust on the feet of them you have hanged.
Somebody giving him something?
No, but there's clearly someone moving around back there. You can see the shadows. And
Yeah,
he
but
keeps,
that's it.
the other one keeps going to the window too.
Yes.
Mira, hay patos ahí. Mira los patos. Ahí. ¿Por qué hay un tigre y patos? Mira los patos, papá. Mira los patos.
This is one of those ones where you gotta go up and or down and around or up or over or
For what?
to get like to the other side. Like if we needed to go to Greenbelt when you come in, you go into the ends and go up and around and
Somebody giving him something?
No.
We have found the witch. May we burn her? Who do you know she is a witch? She looks like one. Bring her forward.
I'm not a witch, I'm not a witch.
But you are dressed as one.
They dress me up like this. And this isn't my nose, it's a false one. Put the camera on the train and pretend that it's going around the hotel room.
I had it in that salad. Lawrence, so they couldn't do that.
No, but like, how did they do that? I want to touch it, but I know I shouldn't. Wait, is that like is that wire? Or is it like actually ceramics? I'll touch it. I hate museums so much. Touch it. Don't touch it. I can't stand up there.
Someone else's yard?
Because it's hard to tell me. I just have to be so I can get changed. I need to change shoes, so just don't look up.
Hey folks, Nigel Razzleberry here from BBC Six. It looks like you're having some difficulties.
Yeah. Well, Linda and Emery are gone and we can't do anything.
Linda and Emery. Teachers or kidnappers? Stay tuned.
They're not kidnappers.
For what? Maybe 5.
I am your bodyguard. I'm your bodyguard. I am your bodyguard. I am
Bodyguard. That's just cute. They get to you want to scrap? 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 You want to scrap?
Oh, now I have to delete this.
Mine.
Shut
up!
I saw that movie in 2004 too. It was pretty awesome.
Wait, that came out in 2000.
Folks, Nigel Razzmatazz here. In just a few moments, we're going to have to drop the hammer down on some lawbreakers. Here at BBC Six, we're all about exposing injustices where they occur and scaring the shit out of young kids. Hey folks, Nigel Razzmatazz here from BBC Six. BBC Six, we've been getting some reports from the front desk that there's been some light slamming and ramming in this room. Can you confirm or deny, Ben?
It's those two.
There's no slamming.
Has there been any ramming?
There's a private room back there, and it's those two.
Well, at BBC Six, we care a lot about the guests.
Oh, I played the violin one year. I always made sure to do it every year.
What photos do we have so far?
Make it such a big deal.
What?
That's like an orangey side.
Oh, why?
See ya.
Many downloaded the blue light app. Is like,
Just thank you for not asking me when the bus is coming again.
And then Jake Brody was like, well, not the app, but like. What? No, they were like, hate it.
Guys, you just had to be
Yeah, and Rich saw it, and Rich was like walking around. He was like, it was like, yeah, and like, my Mari was like,
Also, Nigel here from the BBC Six. I hear you're coming for dinner. Nigel Razzleberry here from BBC Six. I hear you're here for dinner.
What?
What are you planning to eat tonight?
Food! Pizza! Fredo!
Pizza!
Nigel Razorbound here again. Attempted to conduct a brief interview with a native of Stratford. Mr. DuPont here. Yes. It's been the reaction we've gotten from a lot of the natives. They don't take too kindly to us invading their territory. Nigel Razorbound here again with you on our historical tour of the mysteries of Stratford. Now, I've been hearing a lot today that I apparently resemble an American celebrity, someone by the name of Patrick. I was shown a picture of him, and while I can understand the misconception, the physical and other differences between us are striking. I mean, for starters, my hat is always on forwards. He wears his backwards, like a hoodlum.
Cowslip. No one cares. Yeah, no one actually.
What does he say? I hate the rain. Wait, and you didn't point out Violet, R.I.P. Violet, in the movie.
Yeah, baby.
Oh, you know that movie A Bug's Life with like the last meatballs and then like those crickets come?
I think they're grasshoppers, but...
Let me see that. The grasshopper comes. Scared to elevate the story. Yeah.
They don't celebrate Christmas here, they celebrate Boxing Day.
Nigel Razorbound here from the BBC 6! Call you on candid camera cam! How do you feel?
I feel targeted.
I've been told if you hold down the door open button, magical things will happen. Hi folks, Nigel Razorbound here from BBC 6. I was sent because we're being a bit too noisy and we'd like you to just quiet down a bit.
Wait, I want to be in this video. Hi!
Hi, Nigel Razzle Dazzle from BBC 6.
I like 10 crumpets.
Oh, are you making fun of my accent?
Yeah.
No solicitors, please.
Goodbye.
Monroe.
Why aren't you taking?
Sounds like a bootleg.
What, Senior? Why am I not what?
Take the sword. Quest is dangerous. It's dangerous to go alone. Please take this wooden stick that will help you against nothing.
Okay, and Senior and Irina.
Yeah,
That was pretty good.
Played like 10 notes.
From excitement and fanfare to grumpy Emery in 10 seconds.
Oh my.
Guys, come here, please. Goulash.
Line up next to somebody.
Goulash.
Hey, Patrick, do you like goulash?
No, I didn't.
No, Patrick, put the camera on the train and pretend that it's going around the hotel.
I had in my salad. They won't want to say they couldn't do that.
No, but like, how did they do that? I want to touch it, but I know I shouldn't. Wait, is that like is that wire? Or is it like actually ceramics? I hate museums so much. Don't touch it. I can't stand up.
Hey folks, Nigel Razzleberry here from BBC Six. It looks like you're having some difficulties.
Yeah. Well, Linda and Emery are gone and we can't do anything.
Linda and Emery. Teachers or kidnappers? Stay tuned.
They're not kidnappers.
Unlikely.
For what?
Maybe 5.
I am your bodyguard. I'm your bodyguard. I am your bodyguard. I have
Bodyguard. They get to you want to scrap? 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 You want to scrap mine? You want to scrap mine?
Oh, now I have to delete this.
Mine.
I saw that movie in 2004 too. It was pretty awesome.
Wait, that came out.
Folks, Nigel Razzmatazz here. In just a few moments, we're going to have to drop the hammer down on some lawbreakers.
Alright, so I'm hoping that the audio works here. Yes, no, maybe so. Thanks to Gold Wolf 17 for all the great help. Encouragement, yes. Oh no. Can I be heard? I do not know. Who's the other current viewer, by the way? Well, I'm hoping that my voice is recording. I see levels. I suppose I could always do the smart backup and record a QuickTime file. Let's go ahead and do that. Although, let's be honest, if this audio isn't recording, I will just explain the assignment in class or on Edmodo. But since I feel so tech savvy right now, why not? Okay, cool. Well, hello, people who are watching this now, probably in a classroom where I am residing in the future. We'll talk more in class about some different ways that we can maybe continue to work to add different kinds of support outside of the classroom for learning about our particular content, be that Watership Down or the hero's journey, or we'll talk about the 5-act structure and 5-paragraph sort of classic in air quotes thesis essay when we do Macbeth. We also need to figure out how to make our Macbeth films this year to make sure that that can be done. But by adding more points of contact outside of our 45 minutes in class, I think, well, let me just say briefly, so that I can get done with this 10-hour odyssey of trying to figure out all this technological stuff in one day. The short of it is, the more content that is available out there and the more different places for students, the better everyone, I think, will become at seeking out information, concepts, activities, even leisure activities related to stuff in class. For example, I would like to think that the next time you watch a superhero film or go back and watch, a film from earlier in your life that you had a certain opinion about, you might apply some structural analysis to it, and you might go into a review with some anticipation that you will have a change of mind, however small. Man of Steel was a film that I didn't care much for when it came out, even though I was a fan of some of Zack Snyder's work before it, particularly Watchmen, which I think is my favorite superhero film, even though I know that's sacrilege to people who love the graphic novel. And there's a new Watchmen series on HBO that is a completely different imagining of the sort of concepts. But anyway, I didn't enjoy Man of Steel. I think I had a negative opinion of it. And when I returned to it as a film that I suspected I had misunderestimated, if that makes sense, on a first pass, I went into it with the goal of figuring out the ways in which it was, quote, good. And for those of you who came to watch the Emoji Movie, I had the same approach to that. There are, of course, days, even, stretches that are longer than that where I find myself to be somewhat dismissive of new content, whether it's music or movies. I actually liked all my books in 8th grade English class, but 9th grade was the year where I basically asked the question, why do I have to read all of this? And it wasn't until I got to the end of our second unit, which was our first long unit, kind of like the one you're doing now with a 500-page book, and we were reading Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and I didn't get it. I didn't get why we needed to read this book. Talk about a hero's journey, by the way. But I was, entering the most cynical years of my teenage life, and I kind of thought Charles Dickens was a hack. And you can ask me in class if you'd like to hear the story of how I ultimately reversed that opinion. But it was only really through making a project, an individual project titled How to Write a Long Book, which I still have pieces of, and we'll probably do a video sometime this next week where I can show you that. See, this is why I don't love videos, because I ramble, because I'm worried about explaining everything precisely. And isn't that just the fitting irony for the end of this video? Because, folks, that's the most important thing for you to understand this year about communication and the idea of a natural language. And here I mean, what you might call a spoken language, but basically not a rigorously defined, systematically developed language like algebra or calculus, different modes, right? Like computer programming languages, because although a mathematician could probably successfully push back on this, the thing about a language like English is that it's always changing. And there's a design, built into the very approach of basically creating a language to discuss something like set theory, where you want to make it as strict and concise and by the numbers as possible. And you get to numbers, no pun intended, you get to pick those numbers. So, when Euclid developed Euclidean geometry, he began with the axioms that defined the language. English didn't start like that, and no word exists like that. We can sit down together, and if we're limiting ourselves to Euclidean geometry, which I apologize because you guys are probably taking algebra right now, fine, let's talk about algebra. We could probably leave a table having agreed upon an absolute definition for something like an equation or a variable, because within the limited scope of the language of algebra, those words are rigorously and strictly defined. I think you'll see this tomorrow, but I looked up, one of the words I looked up today, and yes, I look up words every single day, was operator. And there's a pretty funny little assignment, A-level assignment coming, because the fourth definition listed for operator was, and I'm saying this literally to you, was Chinese whispers. That was all that was written for the fourth definition of operator. And when we do the little assignment in class, you'll see how I discovered what that meant, and then had a whole follow-up thought process. But one of the biggest fights I ever got in with my mom was about the word selfish, because I told her that I thought everyone was selfish to some extent all of the time. Even if you're choosing to do things for other people because you've decided that's the right way to live, that's still a decision that you are making to live the best life you possibly can. I was asked to discuss appropriation during the week of Halloween, which is a word that I'm a little uncomfortable discussing because it has a very long history and broad scope of development. And we'll get into it at some point in class probably. But it's interesting how, well, let's think about the Brian Corley's lesson in the gym, where we looked at those dots at the dance, and we talked about the difference between segregation and separation. So a word like segregation is a word that has been, I was going to say crippled, but I'm hyper-conscious this year about trying to avoid ableist terminology. It's a word that has been greatly reduced in its scope and range of meaning because of how it was used, and I think we could safely say problematically across the board, as legal language and political language in social and political policies. Social justice and cultural appropriation are two phrases that both involve two very broad, highly defined words. And by highly defined, I mean they have all sorts of meanings and have over time. I mean, appropriation literally means two opposite things. It means the taking of something for oneself, or, and originally, it means the doling or meting out or giving out of things, such as, say, a king giving land to someone in a feudal system. This is where our adjective appropriate comes from, because that which is appropriate is that which has been specifically iterated as acceptable or fitting by someone in a position of authority. I'm going to come back to this picture on the screen here in a second, but cultural appropriation seems to owe the most, sort of linguistically, to the phrase artistic appropriation, which is a term that had been used for several decades to describe the way in which artists, well, some would say can, I would say of course they have to, because there's nothing truly new, but the way in which artists will take pre-existing ideas works. Think of something like an epigraph, right? That is artistic appropriation of somebody else's language to help tell your story. For those of you who like hip-hop music, hip-hop is all about appropriation and the taking of different sounds and samples and rhythmic influences. I mean, in one song, you might hear, a clave drum structure from Cuba, and you might hear, I don't know, I'm thinking of a Kanye West song, because of course I am, that involves African, Cuban, and then a range of American influences in terms of its structure, instrumentation, lyrical references. I mean, this is what we do. We take things, we mix them up, and put a little bit of ourself into them, or a lot of ourself, and reveal a new perspective. So I think when we talk about cultural appropriation in class, we'll want to talk about the whole range of the subject, the way in which, for instance, English teachers culturally appropriate stories and tell you to read them. In fact, one of the only recommendation we got from the Isaacs Committee, if you don't know what that is, don't worry, as a department for the upper school, was to consider adding more courses that specifically featured non-Western, with a capital W, texts. So that is the accreditation board that our school uses, specifically telling the English department what stories from what cultures we're missing and we need to appropriate or dole out to you. We can also talk about the fact that I don't think anyone would have dared to come in, a traditional American Indian dress from whatever tribe, and maybe part of the problem with it is normally you just dress like an Indian and you aren't really thinking about the fact that there were individuals and tribes and varied cultures. But somebody was at the middle school dance in an inflatable sumo suit. And I thought it was interesting that apparently making fun of sumo wrestlers, a hugely important cultural role in Japan, but apparently that's okay. But if someone had worn a feather headdress, even respectfully, and the sumo suit wasn't respectful, it surely would have been an issue. So anyway, sorry, long tangent. This is honestly what I do most days, guys, is I sit at home, I go out, see my family, go to movies and things like that, but I do things that compel me, because living simply does this, to think about language and think about meaning and deal with this irreconcilable paradox that there is so much to learn, and yet we can never learn anything perfectly, and we'll never be able to learn it all. And no matter how many words I know, or how carefully I study them, or how hard I try to explain them, there's never really any one-to-one correspondence of meaning between two humans who are speaking or writing to each other. That meaning, that stuff that we think we're getting out of conversations, is only forming in the weird, ethereal, interstitial space between the two people who are talking. And we should talk more about body language and gesticulation than we normally do in my class. Maybe Macbeth and the play would be a good time to do that as well. But quite often, so much of the meaning we take away from conversations is from paratextual information. So the tone of voice someone is using, the body language that they're presenting, deliberate intonation. Somebody tomorrow hopefully will be like, "Sweet video, Patrick," in a very ambiguous tone, which will, I'll be honest, I don't care. I feel like I've done a fantastic job. Okay, let's look at this picture that hopefully is on the screen in front of you in class, or I've passed it out because I completely failed at this. Right? This is part of the teaser alert here of the book that I am working on as my Watership Down project. which we'll start talking a little more about this week, as you guys begin your individual projects. But vocabulary and vocabulary acquisition is something that almost everyone thinks is important for students who are in secondary school, meaning middle and high school. How do you go about finding new words? How do you learn words that are foreign to you when you come across them? I had a moment last week where I came across a word I was pretty sure I'd never seen before. I had to look it up. I've, of course, forgotten what it was. It started with a P. It was a sort of a Greek or Latin word for a burst of frenzy of energy. And I'll look it up after this video. But when I went to look it up, one of the citation definitions was from The Call of the Wild, the book by Jack London, which I absolutely read when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. And I don't have any memory in my life, concrete memory, of reading a word in a book that I didn't know and not kind of figuring out what it meant. So it led to a really interesting reflective process where I tried to think back to my sweet top bunk in my bedroom where I read that book, and also how I went about looking up new words or investigating meaning when I was a kid. I was always a big one for lists, guys, books with lists. I have all sorts of little dictionaries everywhere that just have lists of legal words, lists of antiquated slang. I found a resource earlier today that is about thieves, sort of a language that thieves in England used to use. I'm putting thieves in air quotes as well, which I think is an example of what I would call a superliteracy, or a language that is intentionally created to be, well, sort of, if it's super, it's the opposite of subversive, but to sort of be above the people around you. So it's a coded language, sort of like the way some of you guys might talk around adults who aren't fully in the know, myself included, as Connor and Lennon the other day were asking me if I vibe, and I'm still waiting for them to explain to me what that means. But a super literacy is language that, say, inmates in a prison could develop to communicate about things. Groups of cultural, linguistic, or otherwise minorities within a larger social structure might create such a language. The only other middle school I taught at for just half a year, in between Castac and Roper, was a school for primarily, well, not primarily, everyone there spoke Arabic as their first language. So there was this way in which these students could talk about everything I was doing in class, and I didn't really know what they were saying. So, with this little assignment here, we're going to try and double back to analogs, the idea of analogy, and we're going to think a little bit about anagrams, and also homophones, hypernyms, some other categories and ways that you can search words that for some of you, like Philip, no, I think there will be many of you, anybody who likes making lists or sort of collecting little things. I'm thinking now of some of Audrey's artwork, and I know there are some of you that are, why isn't Patrick mentioning me? Super organized and great at taking notes. I don't know. I think some people get really into sports jargon, but I'm not sure how interested all of you guys are in looking up and learning about words. It fascinates me, and I know, I'm an English teacher, but there's so much nuance, and the internet, and particularly the open source and community vetted nature of Wiktionary, and the way that it becomes an aggregate, or what we call a tertiary source, of all these other usage guides, which themselves are tertiary sources, is fascinating. And I'm going to challenge some of you to try and edit Wiktionary Wikipedia entries this year, so that you can have the experience of being a true linguistic prescriber, a true linguistic expert. But one cool thing that Wiktionary does is it will tell you anagrams of words that you look up, which Why would anyone need to know that metric? Well, because then we can play a little game like this. So finally now, the screen, these things that you've been looking at for this entire time I've been rambling, has 10 sets of words. 4 of them are sets of 4, and the other 6 are pairs. I also want to point out that in line item 3, that is slippage, is how you say that word, but that is an outdated spelling. And line 6, you would do well to look up both of those words as if they were French infinitives. So resume, and pardon me for my terrible pronunciation, and mesure, maybe. But measurer, as in a person who measures, although it's a very simple way. You got to look up this word because there's so much else going on with measure. Measure for Measure by William Shakespeare, by the way. What's it about? Oh, I think it's about music, melodies, right? So we use measure for all sorts of things. But I think you might be surprised by the actual definition for a resume, which you are probably used to seeing with a just ending with an E with another accent on it, which is makes it, well, I guess in this case an object, but that's also how you often form past participles in French, in the passé composé. Anyway, I challenge you to choose a set of words from here. Okay, pick one with a word that seems interesting to you. I would encourage you, if you're not interested in this and you want an easy way to go about it, do not pick, what are the easiest words here? Warden and wander, or warder and ward, or scene and genies, right? If you're not excited or interested about delving into just a couple specific words in kind of a close reading type assignment, pick a set with at least one word that you don't know or don't understand. If you like Beowulf, which who wouldn't, because you've never had to read it. But I thought a lot about Beowulf when I did number 7. 8 is an interesting one. If you're into science, you might get a kick out of 2. But I basically have found you sets of anagrams that I think have tenuous to, in some cases, extremely strong semantic connections. Basically meaning that if we just look at scene and genies, right? Well, first of all, there's an idea that a seer, one way that you could use the word seer, is to talk about someone like Fiverr who is prophetic and who sort of is tapped into a supernatural world, quite possibly the supernatural world in which genies exist. Genie itself is a fascinating word. Spoiler alert for those of you who picked number 1. But genie, the word that it's closest to in meaning is the word jinn, which can be spelled a couple of different ways. J-I-N-N, D-J-I-N-N, D-J-I-N. I think it's kind of like czar in that way. But it went through, I believe it was the Greek. It was either Greek or Latin. I think it was through the Greek because the word genius, as we still use, existed, and its original meaning was something like a sort of supernatural or semi-divine spirit, fairy guide. I always think of like Navi from The Legend of Zelda. But someone who had a genius or had genius was someone who had this sort of supernatural tap into the world. And Jinn was pretty close in terms of its structure and its meaning. So somebody shrugged their shoulders and just went with it. Anyway, you're going to pick one of these sets, and you're going to follow some Edmodo instructions to come tomorrow to create your own little document or other type of presentation about the connections that you have found both between the words or among the words you've chosen. And also to other words that interest you when you do your research. So you're essentially going to develop a list of personal vocabulary that interests you based upon one of these jumping off points. So, yeah, kind of a long-winded way to get to that. I promise I will get better at making concise videos that are a way for us to reflect back upon things we've done in class and add new content outside of class. So to end by circling back to the first thing I said, I think the more different ways in which we can create, disseminate, and return to content, whether it be external text or the thoughts of the people in our class, and by class there I mean the 8th grade, and I'm including myself in that as well. I want to know when you guys are thinking about Watership Down outside of school and have a cool new thought. I think I already referenced to one class the text conversation Jonathan and I had about To Kill a Mockingbird. It was awesome, about the hero's journey. I had new, emerging, fresh thoughts about who might be the heroes in certain parts of that book, only because Jonathan made a strong argument that then I was able to argue against. And it was the best conversation I've had about To Kill a Mockingbird in 3 years, as crazy as that might sound. That book had gotten a little bit one note and stale and preached to me, which is why I'm going back to Go Set a Watchman with the 7th grade this year. But anyway, I'm going to be putting some things up on that website tonight, and tomorrow in class we'll do a brief check-in about what I've done over the weekend, and then I'll ask you guys to begin your day by making plans for how you're going to use the work days during this coming week, and just making sure everyone's on track to submit that master checklist, hopefully by Wednesday, but if not, then definitely before Thanksgiving, or X-giving, as I like to call it. All right, I'll leave you with this final fact about sometimes, and I found this word today while I was looking for anagrams, Xtians, X-T-I-A-N-S, is a word that is sometimes used to refer to Christians. And in case you never knew, and I bet you didn't, where Xmas comes from, it is actually a little bit misleading. It is not because an X itself is a cross, but it's rather because the Greek letter chi looks like an X to us, and chi, C-H-I, right? Chi would have been the first Greek letter used in writing out the word Christ. So there you have it. I like to call it X-giving because I'm not really sure. Ask me about that tomorrow. All right, folks, have a great night.